Welcome everyone to our workshop today on prior knowledge, research, and information literacy. I'm so excited to have you all here today for our workshop. I think this is a really great topic. I hope folks will find it interesting. I definitely found it really interesting as I was putting the presentation together. For anyone who doesn't know me, my name is Jane Hammonds. I'm an assistant professor in the university libraries at Ohio State. I'm the teaching and learning engagement librarian, and you can contact me at hammonds.73@osu.edu. What we're going to be doing today is we're going to first take a really big picture look at the impact of prior knowledge on student learning. And then we're going to try to bring that in to more focus and think about the relationship between prior knowledge, research, and information literacy. So kind of bring that focus back together. Then I'm going to share a bunch of different activities that you might be able to use to help either identify or activate students' prior knowledge. I wanted to highlight a couple of key resources that were really important to me in putting this workshop together. I know a lot of folks are probably familiar with the book, How Learning Works, 7 Research-Based Principles for Smart Teaching. If you haven't had a chance to take a look at that book, definitely recommend that you check that out. It's a really great resource, not just for learning about prior knowledge, but learning about teaching and learning in general. The Decoding the Disciplines model, developed by Joan Middendorf and David Pace, was also important in thinking about this workshop. And finally, another book that's really been influential in my teaching, Small Teaching by James Lang, also had some influence in this workshop today. So I wanted to make sure that folks are aware of those resources that guided a lot of the content from the workshop for today. So prior knowledge and learning. So let's take a big picture view of prior knowledge and how it impacts learning. So we're going to start and have a quick little discussion, give you an opportunity to share. So our opening discussion question is, what do you already know about how prior knowledge can impact student learning? So we'll do this as a Jamboard. I'll share the link one more time in the chat there. So you should see a link on there to a Jamboard. So we'll go ahead and go out to that Jamboard and let folks post their responses there. All right. So if you haven't used the Jamboard before, the easiest way to post a response is to go over here on the left-hand side. You'll see an option to add a sticky note. You can click that option, type your response into that sticky note, and go ahead and click save, and that will post it to the Jamboard. So our question is, what do you already know about how prior knowledge can impact? So I'll give folks a chance to share the responses if you feel comfortable sharing your responses here on the Jamboard. And they all pop up in the same place. So I'll go ahead and kind of move those around. And you can move your own around as well if you would like to. These a little bit bigger so I can read them. Getting to the point where having to maximize things all the time, which I didn't used to have to do just a few years ago. Right, so some of the responses that are coming in, familiarity helps speed learning, right? Absolutely. But we also have biases can also impede learning. Yep, absolutely. So one person said, if students feel like they don't have prior knowledge, then it can affect their confidence in a subject. Yes, absolutely. Can help students understand that they do know something about it. Absolutely. Help students get centered on the topic. Prior knowledge can influence how you perceive new information and what existing information your brain connects with, right? So pointing out that importance of like connecting with things that you already know. Let's see. Every student is coming in with their own experiences, have to activate their schema to prep for the lesson. Yes, absolutely. Great response there. For international students, this can affect their overall success at a university. Absolutely. I think for all students, but yeah, especially with international students may face special barriers there as well. Students aren't blank slates or empty vessels. They already know some stuff. Yes, absolutely. Students already know a lot of stuff, right? They come in with a lot of experiences and a lot of things that they already know. So what can we do to activate that knowledge or, connect with that knowledge? Lack of familiarity with a library as a place for research can have a deep impact on student learning. So yeah, absolutely. Very specific. If there are certain experiences that they haven't had. For example, using a library, using library resources that can impede their learning ability. Absolutely. So I think, as you guys are getting your responses here, it's coming through really clearly that prior knowledge can have a really significant impact on students' ability to learn, right? If they have prior knowledge that is relevant, that's valuable, that can make the learning process easier. But if they have potential biases or maybe experiences that they're missing that we expect them to have, then that can also have an impact on their ability to learn. Absolutely. Students may not know that they're plagiarizing. Yeah. So, very specific things. If students don't have certain past experiences or haven't learned things in the past, things that we expect them to do may be unclear to them or may not make much sense to them. Absolutely. So, as you folks are getting at, right, when students can connect what they are learning to what they already know, right? Something, if they already, what they already know is accurate, if what they already know is relevant, if they can connect what they're learning to something that they already know, the new knowledge is going to stick better, right? Things connect better if it has something to connect to, right? So the more things that we can help them connect what we're trying to teach to, that's going to give them a better opportunity to learn and to remember what we are trying to teach them. Right. The challenge is, and this is something that you all also got in your responses there, that prior knowledge is not always helpful, right? Sometimes prior knowledge can hinder students' learning, right? So that can be either prior knowledge that we expect them to have, but they actually don't have, or prior knowledge that is in some way inaccurate or biased, and that can then hinder their ability to learn something new, right? So prior knowledge can have really positive impacts on student learning, but could also be a hindrance to student learning as well. And so in How Learning Works, they talk about kind of different categories of prior knowledge and how you can connect these prior knowledges so that prior knowledge can be very valuable if, first of all, if it's activated, right? If we can actually have them recognize that they already know something about it. But it has to be sufficient, appropriate, accurate, right? Prior knowledge. But it can also hinder learning if it's inactive, if it's insufficient, inappropriate, inaccurate. So we're going to talk a little bit about these different categories. So thinking about some of these examples, what might be an example of accurate but insufficient knowledge? You don't have to share. You can share if you'd like, but you don't have to. But just think to yourself, what would it look like for a student to have knowledge that was accurate but insufficient? So I'll pause here just for a few seconds to let folks have a chance to think about what that looks like. So we've all probably had the experience where we've asked students if they understand something and they say that they do, right? But then they really don't, right? It's clear that they really don't. Yeah, knowing how to use scholarly articles, but not knowing how to access, right? I can use the library website to search articles. Yeah, folks are sharing good examples, right? So they've heard of something, they are familiar with certain terms, right? But they don't really know how to use that knowledge in any real way, right? So, talking about the difference between declarative knowledge and procedural knowledge. Yes, I'm familiar with that term. Well, does that mean that you can actually do it? I may know how to access the library website. I may know what the library website looks like. Do I actually know how to find sources using that library website, right? Right. How to evaluate music for a playlist, but not how to apply that to a scholarly literature review. Yeah. So there's so many different areas that come into. But the challenge is that, if we're asking students, do you understand this? Are you familiar with this? They may say yes, and they may think that they are familiar with these things. But when it comes down to actually using these things or being able to apply that knowledge, they find that they're not able to. And so when students have limited knowledge of a topic, they may think that they're more prepared than they are. We may think that they're more prepared than they are. Um, so sometimes this knowledge, if it's, that little bit of knowledge can sometimes be a little bit dangerous in some ways, if it makes the student think that they are going to be more able to do something than they actually are. Absolutely. Some comments coming in. They may know how to do in-text citations or cite images. Yeah. right? So they may know what a general citation is, but not how to actually do that for different types of sources, for example, which is why pre-testing works so well. Yes, great. Thank you, Kate. Anticipating what we're going to talk about later with pre-testing. So there's an example of one type of prior knowledge that students might have. They might have knowledge that is accurate, but just is not sufficient to allow them to really be able to do anything effectively with that knowledge. Another example of the type of prior knowledge students might have would be knowledge that is accurate, but is inappropriate. So again, I'll give folks a chance to think about what might an example of accurate but inappropriate knowledge look like. And again, you don't have to post, you can share if you would like, not required, but think about what that looks like to think about it's accurate but inappropriate knowledge. Um, so a few examples of what this might look like would be something that it's technically sort of correct, but within the particular context, it's actually going to hinder their understanding of the material. So one example of this is something that has a term that has an everyday meaning, but also has a more specific technical or professional meaning. If they try to transfer that everyday meaning over into that more specific context, it may actually hinder their learning. Right. So an example that they give in how learning works is the concept of negative reinforcement. There's sort of a popular understanding of the term negative reinforcement as being punishment. But in the actual sort of in psychology, negative reinforcement actually is removing something. So you remove like a negative influence to get someone to do something. So the popular understanding of the term negative reinforcement is directly opposite from the actual meaning when it's used in the context of psychology. But if students come in with that, having that popular understanding of the term, then they may struggle to make that switch and recognize what it actually means in that particular context. Another specific example is like terms that cross disciplines that can have very different meanings depending on the discipline. So what a primary source looks like can be different depending on the field. And if students come in from a history background and go into a chemistry class and they're talking about primary sources, they may be thinking about very different things. And again, that can hinder their ability, their understanding of those things. All right. Yeah. Having read everything by Dan Brown. Yeah, absolutely. So in this case, it's not that the student's understanding is wrong. It's just it's not going to work in the particular context where they're trying to use it. And this I think can be really challenging to help students move past a more popular understanding of a concept to actually get to what the real understanding of is. And of course, there's sometimes when students' prior knowledge is just plain inaccurate, right? It's just wrong for whatever reason, however they came about that knowledge it's just wrong. And the challenge, of course, there is we know that it's common habit for all of us, not just students, for all of us to tend to ignore or distrust something that challenges something that we think we already know, right? Misconceptions can be very difficult to correct. And if we just give the correct information one time, that's probably not going to be enough. I mean, again, this is not a problem that's just for students. Everyone has that sort of bias where we tend to reject things that go against things that we already know. So those are different examples of prior knowledge that students might have that can hinder their learning. And I also wanted to highlight that this doesn't necessarily have to be about specific tasks or specific concepts, but students can have also prior understandings of a particular discipline or how a course might work. One of the things that I talked about in another workshop I was giving the other day was sort of students coming in with an understanding of what they think college is supposed to be like and what a class is supposed to be like. And this is what happens in a course. And when what we do challenges that in some way, they might have a negative reaction to that. You often hear that with students, like they don't like active learning. They want it to be just the traditional lecture because that's what they think college is supposed to be about, right? So there can be those more emotional disconnects between either the subject matter or how they think the process is supposed to go. So those can also be part of the prior sort of understandings or experience that our students are coming in. Right. And then that comes back to our own expectations. We make assumptions ourselves about what we think our students are going to know coming in, what we think they should know coming in. We have our own prior knowledge that is based on our experiences, based on our expertise, based on our disciplinary background. Sometimes we can't recognize how much prior knowledge we actually have, right? Certain things have become natural to us. They've just become part of, the way that we think about our discipline, our field, or the processes that we're teaching. And so we may not realize how big the gap is between our knowledge and what our students actually know. And so just wanted to highlight that as something important to keep in mind as well. So the summary for this section really quickly, right? That we know prior knowledge can help students learning. If we're able to connect what they are learning to something that they already know, that can help. But it can also hinder student learning if it's inaccurate prior knowledge or insufficient prior knowledge, or it's just inappropriate for that particular context. So what can we do to activate their prior knowledge? What can we do to identify and fill in when their knowledge may be insufficient? What can we do to start correcting misconceptions that students might have that can hinder their learning? That's what we're going to talk about, especially in the last part of this workshop. So I'll pause really quickly to see if folks have questions or comments that they would like to share. And then we'll jump into connecting this, as folks have already been doing in their comments, connecting this a little bit more specifically to research and information literacy. The case for tabula rasa. Yeah. Uh, all right. So folks have already shared some examples in the chat, but you can take a second to think about research assignments, think about information literacy, an example in which you have seen where students had prior knowledge that was inaccurate or insufficient and that hindered their ability to complete like a task, to complete a research assignment, an inquiry-based assignment. So think about that in your own context. What is an example that you remember that you've experienced, whatever your role might be as an instructor, as a librarian, when you think that insufficient or inaccurate prior knowledge has hindered student learning? You don't have to share. You can share those if you'd like, but I just wanted to give everyone a chance to reflect. Let's see. Oh, Madeline, yes. Students were under the impression that MLA is the only citation style and were horrified to learn that they would need to use APA. Yes. I'm always horrified when I find out I have to use the Chicago style instead of APA. Absolutely. So yeah, but that's a great example, right? Not realizing how many different citation styles there are, and this idea that different citation styles are connected to different disciplines or field, right? Had some students that love Chicago style. Yeah, I don't get the love for Chicago style myself, even though I have a historical background. Oh no, Chicago or die. Brooke loves Chicago. Okay, I'll try to not go too hard on Chicago style then. Yeah, basic, but they incorrectly memorized, recalled multiplication tables. From that mistake, the rest of their work was wrong. Yeah, that's a really great, simple example, Brooke. Yeah. So a couple of things that I wanted to highlight really quickly. I think that many students may come in with a misunderstanding or a misconception about what academic research is supposed to look like, right? Students coming in from a high school background, for example, may think of research primarily as the process of compiling and summarizing existing information on a topic. Or they may have more of a kind of traditional book report kind of perspective in mind. So many students may be unfamiliar, and they may not have the experiences that will allow them to really recognize what we mean when we talk about research in an academic context. So we have often those expectations that students are supposed to place their sources in conversation with each other. They're supposed to be able to contribute their own voice. And if students don't have this conception of what it means to do research, they may struggle, right, when they get research assignments. And that's where we get those assignments that it's just, listing of one source after the other, summarizing each source, but not doing anything to integrate those sources or bring those together or create any analysis or interpretation of that. right? So their prior experience with research, their prior understanding of what the term research means could hinder their ability to create the kind of research assignments that we often are expecting them to create. So I think that's a really big one, but that term research is a really loaded one. And the prior understanding that students have about what it means to do research can really impact their ability to be successful on research assignments. Search tools, right? I've seen this so many times, right? They become familiar with certain types of search tools that they know how to use, and they want to use those tools in every situation, no matter the context, right? And that whether that's using Wikipedia or using Google, or whether there's one database that they learned how to use in high school, and they go back to those familiar tools, right? Those are the ones that they know. So this idea of there being, many different research tools and hundreds of different databases that students could use, right? This could lead them to select research tools that are inappropriate to the task. So their prior knowledge about where to go to find information sources could lead them on the wrong path to say that, oh, there's no sources out there on that topic. Well, that's really because they were searching in the wrong database. But they didn't realize that because they're going back to that familiar, here's what I already know how to do kind of search. So pause here again. I want to talk more specifically about research terms. So one of the types of knowledge we talked about was prior knowledge that's accurate but inappropriate. So terms that may have one meaning in everyday context, but very different meaning in a more specific context. So I'd love to hear what you all think. What are examples of terms that we commonly use in research assignments that has an everyday meaning that is different from its meaning in the research context? So I'll let folks think about that. Again, share your responses in the chat. I'm going to take a look at the chat in a second. What are examples of terms that have a commonly used sort of everyday meaning that is different from its meaning in the research context? Yeah. See some responses. Folks previously were talking about sort of challenges that students have in thinking of what they think is appropriate or relevant. Blew my students' mind by showing them Credo reference. Yes, right. Expanding the range of sources that are available to them. So some of the terms that folks are highlighting that have different meanings. Authority, yes. Argument, web source, yeah. Journal, absolutely, Mandy. Database, literature, Kate, yes, Katie, literature review, model, abstract, right? Data, bias, knowledge, yes. Current, article, yeah, that's a great one. Relevant, right? Peer reviewed, right? They think it means to find a friend and reach their paper and give it back to them. Yes. Research, absolutely, Emily, right? So yeah, these are great, great responses. And you all highlighted basically all the ones that I were going to highlight and many more, right? But there's a lot of terms out there that have very specific meanings when we're talking about research and have more general everyday meanings. So journal, citation, literature, peer review, primary source, research, popular source. Other folks that, ones that folks were sharing as well. Authority, critical, right? That's an important term, right? That we use a lot that has a different meaning in sort of everyday context. Yeah, absolutely. So we think about these terms, and these are terms that become familiar to us in our roles as instructors, as our roles as librarians. We use them, and we may not recognize the everyday meaning of that term, maybe creating a confusion for students. I had one example where I was talking with students about popular sources. And so for librarians, when we talk about popular sources, we contrast them very specifically, right, with scholarly sources. But this student really took the term popular to mean which source that had been viewed the most or read the most, right? Which is kind of the same, but it's a little bit different, right? And they were really talking about the most popular sources. So like Dan Brown, had someone mentioned in the chat, Dan Brown is a popular author, right? And so thinking about popularity in that term. And so it was just, and that was one of those moments when I was like, okay, I'm using a term and they're not quite, we have a different understanding. So their everyday understanding of that term is different than that understanding of the term in the research context. Jill, that's a great idea. Yeah, Jill, I call popular sources mainstream and they seem to understand that. That's a great, I like that, Jill. Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for sharing that. So a couple more things I wanted to highlight really quickly. Evaluation strategies. A lot of students coming in have been taught evaluation strategies. Someone had mentioned the CRAP test in the chat. So a lot of students had been taught evaluation strategies based around kind of that surface level evaluation of the sources and really highlighting things like using the domain as a way to evaluate a source, trusting what is said on the About Us page, the general appearance of the site, right? And folks, the CRAP test, as some folks may not realize, go back like to the 80s at a very early time of the internet. And a lot of these strategies that students have been taught have generally been shown to not be very effective, right? Looking at domain name can lead students in a really wrong direction when it comes to thinking about the credibility of a source. And so, but these are things that I still hear all the time, students coming into our classes saying, well, oh, this is a .org source, so that must mean that it's a credible source. And that's something that they've been taught and that, at certain times may have had a lot more value as evaluation strategy than I think it does now. Thinking about these kinds of evaluation strategies that students might have, this prior knowledge that actually could hinder their ability to really critically evaluate the sources in a way that we might want them to. Great question, Margaret. Margaret shared, what is CRAP? CRAP is a evaluation strategy that has been taught for a lot of years on how to evaluate online sources. And it encourages students to look at currency, relevance, accuracy, authority, and purpose. Which I don't want to say, like, I don't think that I think it's important that students do consider currency and students do consider authority and purpose. Those are all important. But the way that CRAP has often been taught is that it encourages students to look at features of an online source, such as the domain .org, .com, that really aren't really relevant to determining whether a source is credible or not. Or it encourages, it's kind of like a checklist approach to evaluating sources that doesn't have as much effectiveness as the internet has developed than perhaps it had when it was originally developed. So thank you for that question. Right, and some folks are sharing in the chat. So CRAP is often contrasted with the lateral reading strategy, in which students are encouraged to look across multiple sources. So rather than staying on the one online source that they found and saying, okay, this is a good source because in the About Us, it says that they're a trustworthy organization, right? But we know that folks can lie on the internet, right? So it encourages them to actually go out and look at what other people say about a source, right? Is there a new acronym to use? Kathleen? So a lot of folks do look at the SIFT strategy, which was developed by, oh gosh, one of the librarians in the group. Help me out. I can't remember his name at the moment. But SIFT is stop, investigate the source, find other sources, and I'm going to forget the last one as well. Mike Colford, thank you for the librarians in the group. So I'll try to share some info on the SIFT strategy in my follow-up email. Folks are interested in taking a look at that. Lateral reading is why I like Wikipedia as a starting point. Yes, and I agree, Andrew. So lateral reading, that's a strategy that it encourages students to consider Wikipedia as a source. Like, what does Wikipedia say about this organization? Not relying totally on Wikipedia, but having students use that. Who has a new book? Can't recall the name. Yes, I think it's called Verified. I actually have it on my shelf over there. I haven't had a chance to read it yet, but I did get it in. So thank you for that. Yeah, so basically, I don't want to spend too much time talking about lateral reading. If you're interested in lateral reading and SIFT, I do have recorded workshops on lateral reading. And again, I'll share that information in the follow-up email. But wanted to pause here to think about when we think about research, when we think about information literacy, what are some other examples that you all might have of where students' prior knowledge may lead them to not be as effective as they have? Inaccurate prior knowledge or insufficient prior knowledge. And if you have any questions. So we'll pause here, and then the last part will be focused on different strategies that we can use or activities that we can use to sort of identify students' prior knowledge, activate good prior knowledge, and start correcting any misconceptions that students might have. So pause for questions. They don't evaluate the use of sound bites. Sarah shared students thinking they already know all of the main arguments about a topic, so they are not open to investigating other ideas. Yes, I see this a lot with their understanding about academic majors. Yeah, that's a great response, Sarah. Thank you. Right? If students think they already know it all, then they're not going to be open, right? Dismissive of the source of mimetic ideas. Sometimes they think Google Scholar is the best way to search. Yeah. Not that I think that Google Scholar is necessarily a terrible way to search. I use Google Scholar a lot myself, but it's important that they understand sort of the place of Google Scholar in the broader ecosystem of, search tools. A failure of human curiosity and presence seeing. Oh, interesting response, Nathan. Yeah. We do like to think that we know things already. Absolutely. And so sometimes when we are confronted with things that either something that we don't know, we don't want to admit that we don't know it, or we don't want to accept that we don't know something. Yeah. All right. So what are some of the different kinds of activities that we might be able to do that can help activate the accurate prior knowledge that students have, or identify misconceptions that students might have that hinder their learning? So I'm going to share a bunch of different types of activities, and these could work depending on the different contexts that you're teaching in. Some may work better than others. If you're teaching full semester classes, there should be some that fit for you. If you're teaching, one-shot librarian sessions, some of these should work as well. So hopefully everyone will find something that looks helpful to them. So we have a quick poll here. So if you feel comfortable sharing in the chat, consider your understanding of the term systematic literature review. Which best matches your familiarity with the term? I have heard of the term. I can define the term. I can conduct a systematic literature review. I can teach others how to conduct a systematic literature review. If you feel comfortable sharing in the chat, your familiarity with that term. Right, and so we see we're seeing a lot of different responses coming in. We have several folks who are saying that they're at the level of I can teach others how to do a systematic literature review. But we also have a lot of folks that are at the I have heard of the term level, and then others in between as well. Someone had put all of them in there, which is totally okay. Yeah. B or C, not sure. Yeah, so this is just a quick little poll, right? And I'm not expecting that everyone actually knows, how to do a systematic literature review. That's totally okay if you don't. That's not the point. But the point is to get, to the idea of self-assessment as one sort of quick strategy that we can do to get an idea of what our students already know. Now, we know that self-assessment can be flawed, right? Students, we all often think that we know more than we actually do. But that's why I think it's helpful to break it out into give multiple options. So don't just ask students, are you familiar with this term? Or do you know this term? Or have you heard, right? So having them do a little bit of critical thinking about what level they are actually at, right? Whether it's, yes, I've heard of that term, down to I could teach it to someone else, I could explain it to someone else, I could actually use it to solve problems. So giving them a chance to really do a little bit deeper dive into the self-assessment, right? And thinking like, if you actually had to teach someone else this concept, this topic, could you do that? And, even giving them a chance to do a quick try at it, right? But having them self-assess their knowledge. It's not perfect, not a perfect strategy. People are always going to overestimate their ability. But this can be, if you just need something really quickly to have an idea of where folks stand. Like if I were teaching a class on systematic literature review and I got the responses that we just got in the chat, that would indicate to me that I needed to spend some time really talking about this, because there were several folks who were noting that they weren't really, familiar with how to do that. So just a quick, activity, not going to be perfect, but something that could give some idea of where your students stand on particular concepts or topics. Kate mentioned earlier in the chat, pre-tests or opening questions. I know we often don't like to give too many quizzes or too many pre-tests, but if we can give short pre-tests or have students do just opening questions, thinking about what are the skills that students need to learn to complete this assignment. If I'm having my students do a research assignment, if they're doing a literature review, they're doing an annotated bibliography, I want them to find a scholarly article. What are the skills that students need to know to be able to do that? And do a quick little test. This can be online, it can be in person, using your learning management system, using pen and paper, lots of ways that this could work out. But just those little quick pre-tests that has the effect of, first, for students that do know something, that sort of activates that prior knowledge for them. It starts to write, hey, yes, I have heard of this. Yes, I do remember this. It helps students recognize what's going to be important in the lesson. So if you give a pretest on something and then that term or that concept pops up later on, they might pay a little bit more attention to that if it pops up, right? Because they've seen that in the pretest. And then that can give you some feedback as well. If all of the students or most of the students really struggle with a particular question, you'll know where it is that you need to give them a little bit more attention. So pre-test opening questions can be great at getting at prior knowledge. One version of this, and folks that have been to my workshops before know I talk about these all the time. I love true-false activities. Very simple, very easy. But I would give students, here's 5 statements on the purpose of a literature review. The purpose of a literature review is to find novels related to your topic. And if they say yes to that, then you understand, hey, they have that understanding of literature, that's sort of that everyday understanding of literature, not the way that we talk about it in higher education, right? So I've got several examples of these that folks are welcome to take and modify and use on your own. But really quick, in students, individuals, and groups, I would often make some of the statements kind of deliberately ambiguous, so that students wouldn't be sure themselves, and they would have to kind of justify their answer. And that opened up a space for a conversation. So I would often have fun with these, but yeah, quick activities that you can do to get an idea of what students know or don't know related to a particular topic. Brainstorming or crowdsourcing can be really helpful in activating prior knowledge that students have. So what I used to do in my previous classroom, we had a big whiteboard wall, and I would go up there and I would say, okay, we're going to talk about evaluating sources today. What is everything you know about what makes a source authoritative or appropriate or effective? And I would just start jotting down their answers, and we kind of group them together. And then I could highlight, here's ones that I think are really valid. Here's ones that are kind of problematic. But it wouldn't be, one person that was coming up with the wrong answer. Once they were up there, they kind of belonged to everyone. It's crowdsourced, and so it was a little less intimidating for someone who wasn't sure, or who actually had a wrong answer. So I think that this is a great activity to kind of just start activating. What is everything that you know about this topic? Let's talk about it. Syllabus or assignment annotation. This can work depending on, again, if you're teaching a full semester class, you might use a syllabus annotation. If not, you could do an assignment annotation. But have students review that assignment or review the syllabus. And for each week, if they're doing the syllabus, what is things that you already know this week, right? So let's, at the beginning of class, the first day of class, or the second day of class, let's go through this entire syllabus and write down for each week everything that you already know about that topic. And then you could come back to that several times throughout the semester. Let's go back to our syllabus again. What's coming up next week? What are things that we already know about this topic? And again, you can do the same with an assignment. Once the students get the assignment description, give them 10 minutes, 15 minutes, write down everything that you already know about how you would complete this assignment. What are the words that, this assignment's about a literature review. What do you already know about doing that assignment? So again, that just has an opportunity to activate that prior knowledge that they might have, but also give you a chance to get some feedback of where they might have misconceptions that you need to talk about. A gallery walk. This could be a really fun example. So, students are doing a research paper and they have to develop a research question, they have to do a literature review, they have to provide citations, put those up on the walls around the room and have students walk around and write down, okay, what do you know about literature reviews? And they can write their responses there. What do you know about citations? What do you know about what a good research question looks like? And they kind of go around the room and that gets all of those answers out there. And then you can go and kind of talk through the responses that they share, highlight the really good responses, any problematic responses, you can talk about those as well. Concepts maps can be great for identifying students' prior knowledge. You're doing a literature review, let's connect some concepts here. You're searching a database, there's different ways that this can work. They can develop their own concept map. You can give them kind of a start. But I think concept maps can be a helpful tool as well. Research process map. So what you'll see on the screen here, this is a version of a research process map that we developed at Ohio State. But you could have students develop their own research process map. So if they have an upcoming research assignment or an inquiry-based assignment, have them create a visual representation of what their process would be, right? Where would you start? What would be the first step that you would take? What would be the next step that you would take, right? How would you actually go through this process? So they create their own research process map. That helps them to identify what they already know about research. And then, that helps you to see where there might be gaps. Several people are saying that they would start at Google. Is that really where I want them to start? Or they're saying, they're skipping the step of developing a research question. So having them develop their own research process map, think through their own process, what they already know about how to do research, and put that down somewhere. Various versions of self-explaining activities. This is kind of, gets back to the idea that one of the best learning strategies is to learn something by trying to teach it to someone else. So kind of thinking about, okay, explaining it to someone else how you would do this or how you would approach this problem. This can help the student themselves identify where there's something that they don't know, right? I actually can't really explain this really well to my partner. And so that they might recognize where there is knowledge that they are missing. And there's lots of ways that you could do this. We have students, I've mentioned in other webcasts, we have students do screencasts of themselves doing a search and talking through the search so we can get an idea of here's what they're actually thinking as they're doing this. So there's lots of ways that you can do self-explaining activities, but having students actually have to explain what they're doing, maybe try to teach what they're doing to someone else, can be really great in identifying what they do or don't already know about something. And then I wanted to point out really quickly that when we have those situations where we know misunderstandings that students often have, that we can point those out directly, right? If you are giving students a literature review assignment, for example, at the top of the assignment, this is what a literature review is, this is what a literature review is not. So kind of in advance, as we think about our experiences, in advance, recognizing those places where we know there are certain terms or certain concepts or certain tasks that give students difficulty, confronting those misconceptions sort of right from the beginning, right? Or asking them very specific leading questions, right? In this biology class, is the database that you learned how to use in your history class going to be the one to use, right? Or saying, someone mentioned citation styles. I know you may be familiar with this citation style, but this is the citation style we use in this field, and here's why. So, just explicitly giving them that information in those situations where we know those misunderstandings might happen. And I wanted to end here just by talking about making sure we're thinking again about our own expectations. We talk about this a lot, that we have a lot of expectations for what our students are going to know coming in, what we hope that they know, but it's not always the case. And thinking about why we do certain things, the expectations that we have, and what the gap might be between our expectations for their prior knowledge and what their prior knowledge actually is. All right. So as we come to the end here, I get to the chat in a second. Feel free to add again in the chat any key takeaways that you have from the workshop today, any action steps that you have going forward. Any questions that you have? I'll mention we have a few additional workshops coming up. I'll share information with these in the follow-up email, references and attributions there. So as we have a last couple of minutes, questions, comments, thoughts that folks would like to share. Formative assessment, pivot where students are at with their prior knowledge. It's really tricky if they have varying levels of knowledge of English. Yes, absolutely. Self-assessment, perhaps I add, could describe flow chart this process. Yeah. Do you use pictures with words? I think that's for the gallery walk. I think you could do either, Kathleen, whatever worked best in your particular context. How to approach classes that are so multi-level? Yeah, it is really challenging when you do have students at a wide range of background knowledge. One thing that you could potentially do is think about how those students that have more knowledge could act as sort of the in-class tutors. That could be a potential option, so that those students aren't feeling bored when you have to go over more basic level content. Definitely have them more direct annotation of assignments. We talk about them a lot in class before assignments are due, but organize more direct discussions. Yeah, absolutely, Jill. I think that's really helpful, right? We talk about interpreting a research assignment activity, right? We have students go through and underline terms that they don't understand. Circle the action verbs like evaluate and assess and interpret, and talk about what those mean. So let them tell you what they think the purpose of the assignment is, what they're actually supposed to do, and whether that actually fits with what you think the purpose of the assignment is, for sure. Thank you all. Problem is they don't want to talk. Potentially ways that you could do sort of anonymous polling or surveys if students don't want to talk. That could get some responses as well. Yes, I like the assignment because it makes going over the expectations more engaging. The key takeaway is to identify what students already know and integrate that into assignments and make expectations as clear as possible. Yes, absolutely, Karen. Thank you so much for that. So thank you all. I will stick around for a couple more minutes in case folks have additional questions that they would like to share. I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording now. But thank you all for being here today.